Hi, it's DebV. Today I'm doing something a little different, and hopefully I remember to put it in the title. This is just more of a blog kind of a thing, or tips on how to figure for your quilts when you've got a block that you want to make. I mean, when I'm going to do a quilt, sometimes I pick up the fabrics, I look at them, and I go, oh yeah, I know what I want to do with this. And it's just sort of just flows. But that's kind of rare. And the more my brain seems to melt away, the rarer that gets. But, I'm sitting there watching TV, doodling on a pad, going, okay, the fabric's gonna be here tomorrow or whatever. And I was drawing out some different ideas for blocks. Then, a week after the fabric came, I'm sitting in the back room and I found my graph paper. Oh, I hadn't seen this in a couple of years. And I started to draw it out and I couldn't even remember what I had drawn. And I made a different, on point kind of a thing. My points never meet quite right. But you know what, to be perfectly honest, I'm okay with that. I'm not going to, throw a quilt out because my points are cut off after I seamed it together. Please don't torment yourself over those. Yes, we would all love to have those perfect points, and the people that, make videos and have perfect points, I am so envious of. But that's a good for you. I'm glad. I'm so glad you can do those perfect points. And you can tell me all the tips you want. When I get done sewing those together, I'm going to iron it open and say, oh, I got sewed the tip off there. How did I do? It's going to happen. It's not every one of them, but yeah, it happens. But I showed my son. Now, I know it's hard to see this because all I have left, I used to do a lot of paper projects. That was my, I don't have time to sew, period. And you got to do something. So I would come home and play with paper and make cards or boxes or whatever. Anyhow, after all these years, the only ones working were some of my metallic and glittery kind of pens, which you'd think those would clog up first. So that ended up drawn onto in that. And this was with just 3 colors of fabric. And I thought, well, that's not bad. These would be green, and the green just, yeah, you can't really see it. But then in the living room last night, and I pick up my notepad that I hadn't touched in a while, and I'm flipping through it to get to a clean page, and I see where I had doodled these quilt squares, and I find this one. And it was just in pencil. All I did was kind of draw lines until I thought it was interesting. And of course, I always do, like, I try to do 6 or 12, 6 or 9 kind of squares so you can get a feel for the overall look a little bit more. And ideally, you do the whole thing, but I get bored before that's done. I know, I'm like a 2-year-old. So this morning, I drew it out back here on this little thing. And this is the one we've decided to go with. It's just, this plaid is a lighter fabric and it makes it pop. And so you've got this big dark square, and then when these meet, when all the blocks are together, that'll be a big lighter square. So dark, light, and a pop of color in between. It looked interesting in the other drawing. But to figure out what fabrics I need, and to have I need a drawing right there with me at all times so that I don't forget how I'm doing this. So I'm going to have one fabric in my corners. I was in mid-sentence when my son came to the doorway, and I don't even remember what I was saying a minute ago. If you hear a kind of hum in the background, it's the dryer. That's what he was tapping on. Will this bother you? I told him, go ahead and turn it on. half of the stuff I cut out anyway. Blah, blah, blah. Anyways. And then I have to decide on the size, and you'll see some little scribbles because I was going to do it 2 and 4 and 2 and 8-inch blocks, and I kept thinking, man, that fish fabric is going to end up only being this big. I even looked down at the mat and thought, yeah, okay, 4x4, you know, it's pretty good size, but some of those fish, I got the fabric out, and I thought, some of those fish are a couple inches long, though. I think I want a little more of the fabric. So I changed my mind, and I changed it to a 12-inch block. So now I've got 3.5-inch blocks for all of that, and a 6.5-inch block here. Now that I've got that figured out, I have to decide how many across and how many down I'm going to do. So I decided that if they're 12-inch blocks, I only want 6 across. So I'm going to do 72 inches in blocks and then a border. I'm thinking a 3-inch border, which would add 6 inches. That's going to come out to 78 inches. I normally shoot for around 75. And I could plan, say, a 2-inch border and it be smaller. Haven't really decided on the border yet. When I get the whole top done, that's when I really make my final decision on the border, because sometimes until that whole thing is laid out, I just can't picture that border on there. And I don't care if I've drawn it in the picture or not. It always seems different afterwards. But I decided on that. That's 72 inches. And then 7 down is 84. And I think the balance will be better at a little bit shorter. A lot of the time, you know, your length on blankets and quilts and all that kind of, for bed clothing, how's that? It tends to be much longer. The rectangle is a little steeper. But I don't want this design to be that steep. I think it would throw it off. Now that I know that, I know I need 42 blocks. Now the math begins. So if this is going to end up being 3-inch square in the finished quilt top, that means I need a 1/4 inch on each side for seams. So that's a 3.5-inch block. 3.5-inch block translates to 3.5-inch strips that will then be cut into blocks. And some people they sew strips together in funny ways and cut it. But I've messed up quilts because I got my brain wrapped around it backwards instead of forwards, and I cut wrong. So I'm going to cut my blocks and I'm going to sew them in sections like this, straight across. I always, for some reason, from the top to the bottom, straight across. So I will do these blocks, and I will sew the 2 together to fit on here. And I will sew those 2 on. And then I will sew this as a strip and sew it on. Now, if I wanted, I could literally go all the way across and do all 6 blocks by rows and then sew those rows. And, you know, some people have better success at getting their points right. I don't. So I'm going to do it by block. But I will cut it by strip. So if we start with the biggest block and we work our way out, we've got a 6.5-inch block, which means a 6.5-inch strip. I need 42 squares. So 42 squares times 6.5 inches equals 273 inches. Now if I divide that, and I always just go with 40, and yes, sometimes that fabric might, by the time you cut off the selvage, I've had some that has, you know, like 1.5 inch selvage on one side. What the heck, man? And yes, sometimes it comes out a little lower. But I normally have an extra strip because I only needed, say, 2 more blocks from a strip. So you've got all that extra room. And if you're really, you know, if it's coming close to the end, cut, you know, it figures, oh, you need 6.9 strips, then you might want to jump up to 8. Or at least make sure you have a big enough chunk to get a couple more blocks out of, just in case. That's all I'm saying. But for the fish fabric, it's 42 squares at 6.5 inches, comes to 273 inches. I divided that by 40 to decide to find out how many strips I'll need to get those 6.5 inch blocks. And that comes to 1.5 yards. So I know I have enough of that because I bought 2 yards. And I'll have plenty if I mess up any of these blocks when I'm cutting it. I can always say, hey, I'm going to actually need another strip. I know I'll have plenty out of that fabric. All right. For the plaid, I need 3.5 inch. Because again, you add that 1/2 inch for the 2/4 inch seams on either side. That's top, bottom, right, left. All those edges have to have a 1/4 inch added for it. So we just we say 3, and then that means we cut 3.5. So for each block out of this plaid, it's going to be 4 of those squares. So I need 3.5. We divide that into the 40. I know my math is all over. I keep stumbling on my words and doing it over again, and I'm not grabbing fresh paper when it's right here. So we know we're going to get at least 10. Actually, we can get 11 out of there because 35, right? And then 3.5 is 38.5. So yeah, I can get 11. I see I had said 10. That was just an instant. To just estimate, we know we can get 10. But we can actually get 11 out of that. So each strip is 11 blocks. At that point, yeah, my math was nuts. Just figure 11 blocks to a strip equals 4 strips. Simple math. 42 divided by 11 equals almost 4. So you have to cut at least 4 strips. For the blue and the green, we have to add that 1/2 inch because you're going to lay the blocks. You're going to lay each little square on top, one blue and one green together, and you're going to draw a line diagonally from corner to corner. Then you're going to sew 1/4 inch of each side, and then they can be cut and pressed open. Voila! Each time you do that, you've got 2 blocks, 2 blocks, 2 blocks, 2 blocks. But because of this extra seam in the middle, you have to calculate that into the width of your strip. So it goes from 3.5 to 4 because we have to accommodate that 1/2 inch in the middle that we're going to lose. So for how many of each color I need, it's 168 squares. And when I divide that by the 40 inches of the width of the fabric, it comes to 5 strips. It came out less than 5. Now, round up, it should be perfect. It's rare that I have to cut out more unless I just plain screw up my math. I'm not perfect. I screw up math all the time. I just cut out a big chunk where I was trying to do math on the back, and my brain all of a sudden just said, I don't want to do that anymore. And I completely lost my train of thought and said, okay, forget it. We're done with math. Yep. Over it. So I'll cut 5 strips of each of those fabrics. And then I will cut them into my squares. And then I will sew them together. So I've got all this written down. I even reminded myself with directions on how to do it because I have a lot of brain farts. And I need to have visual aids now for most things. I keep visual aids for myself when I'm doing project. I have to. But for this quilt, it really is breaking down to simpler. And I'm sure there's more I could break it down and make it even simpler and faster to sew together, but that's okay. It's not a race. Well, I have to have it done by Christmas, but to be honest, it's September. I've got two Christmas gifts to make, and I was going to make my grandson a quilt, but I'm still in the designing stages of that, so that's not even going to happen because that one is going to be a giant applique and all. Yeah, that one's probably going to be his birthday. So this is the quilt I'll be making. And this was just a little vlog. A little, hi, how you doing? If you've blasted through this video at this point, I want to thank you. I know I'm not on screen. I just couldn't do it today. I'm sorry. I couldn't. Not having a good one. How's that? There's some times when we just can't put our face out there. How's that? And there's a lot of channels that you never see their face. Never, ever, ever see their face. So I'm not going to be angry with myself that today I couldn't show my face. But I do want to thank you for putting up with my jabber-jawing, and I hope I hope this helps if you're trying to figure out the math for a quilt. Once you can get your brain wrapped around, if you're cutting it into strips, once you get your brain wrapped around how to figure out the strips, it's not hard. A lot of the time I will sit down, and that's what all that math on the back was for. The plaid, I only have a little bit. If I can't get more, I really want to use that plaid, I may have to substitute in some of the blocks a different color, but it'll throw it off. It would definitely throw it off because of the way I built the design. But I may have to sit down and literally figure out, I can get X amount of squares, and that's going to cover how much. Because just saying 40 inches does it. It's actually, I did figure it out. It's 11. Each strip will give me 11 of those squares. And I need, did I write it down? That on here. Oh, I had it under the blue and the green. I didn't even. This is why I have to write everything out. So I need 168 of those. Well, when you divide that by 11, you're now talking, let's see, that's, well, right off the top of, there's 10. And then I've got another 58. So that's another 5. So we get 15. Huh. That didn't change it. It's still 15. Even figuring the math the other way around, I cannot shorten that up anymore. I have to have 15 strips, which means I have to have a yard and a half, and I guess I better get it out and measure it before I forget again. Because if I can't get it, this whole quilt is going to have to be changed because of that one fabric. There's not a center point, right? Let's figure this out. So if you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 by 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I have to have visual aids. I can't. So we've got, and that's our center here. See, it doesn't, if you make a square, then you've got a real center. And if I had to change it, it would have to be, I'd have to change at least, let's see, these corners. And that's doable. But you have to do it radiating, you know what I'm saying? So I could do these. This is why I have to have the visual aid. So that I can, because if I'm sitting there just trying to picture it in my head and say, well, by the math, it would be, yeah, my math is always going to be messed up. But if I sit down and I draw how many, If each one of these was a 12-inch block, and I could only have enough plaid for, say, this many, then I would have to use different colors or different fabrics on the corners blocks of each of these blocks to make it kind of at least be one section. Okay, that was a lot of math. And math is not always my friend, I know. They say, but math is your friend. Math is hard sometimes. But hopefully that will be helpful if someone else is, going, but I've never done cut strips and I don't know how to figure it. Once you can get your brain wrapped around that part, like this, each of these blocks are cut from a strip, so it has to be at least one width. If it was a rectangle, then you would pick whichever one is going to work for you. But for a block, just add a 1/2 inch to whatever size you've decided to use for this, and cut your strips that width. Okay, I think I've got it out of my head and into this film. Let's hope I did. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.